The Browns were supposed to be turning the page. New season, new energy. A quarterback room filled with potential. But behind the scenes, something dark has been brewing. Whispers started leaking out of camp. Strange decisions, frozen reps, odd tensions between players and coaches. Then it happened, the kind of move that forces the world to pay attention. The owner of the Cleveland Browns, Jimmy Haslam, slammed his fist on the table and put an end to what he called a reckless situation. He stepped in personally to shut down trade talks and made one thing very clear. Shedeur Sanders isn't going anywhere. But that wasn't just a vote of confidence. It was the start of a war, a full-blown power struggle inside the Browns' organization. On one side, you've got Kevin Stefanski, the head coach, who's refused to give Shedeur even one first-team rep. On the other, the front office, the players, the fans, all watching, waiting, and now speaking out. All signs point to one of the most explosive quarterback controversies the league has seen in years. One decision has split the locker room, fractured trust inside the building, and sparked calls for the head coach to be fired before the season's even halfway over. So why exactly is Shedeur Sanders, a highly scouted, laser-focused, insanely talented quarterback, being iced out like he doesn't even exist? Is it just football strategy? Or is there something deeper? Political? Personal? And now, the key question that could shape the entire season. Did Kevin Stefanski just sabotage his own job, trying to bury the next potential star? Because if Shedeur's really that good and Haslam knows it, then this secret battle in Cleveland could end up flipping the entire NFL conversation upside down. And what happens next might be the biggest decision in Browns history. Stay locked in, because once we peel this story open, you're not going to believe who's really pulling the strings. It started with a statement that didn't feel like coaching, it felt like a warning. In a press conference that should have been routine, Kevin Stefanski made it crystal clear, Shedeur Sanders wasn't getting any first-team reps. Not now, not later. The message wasn't vague, it was surgical. Stfansky even went as far as to compare the situation to when Joe Flacco was starting last season. But here's the problem. Back then, Dillon Gabriel, now the team's current starter, was getting legitimate time to grow, develop, and learn behind the vet. Shedeur's not getting any of that. He's been thrown into the shadows, no pun intended, with second-string practice squad guys, minimal reps, and zero opportunity to fight for the job. And that's when things started to feel off. Because when you look at the Browns' QB depth chart, it's fragile at best. Stfansky already cut loose 2 veteran backups, putting the entire pressure of the position on one guy, Gabriel, who hasn't proven anything yet. One wrong hit, and Shedeur could be forced into action with no game speed reps. So why not prepare the kid? That's where it stopped making sense. This stopped being normal football strategy. It started to look personal, calculated, cold. Then came the whispers. Inside the locker room, guys were already talking. Why is he getting buried? Some teammates started questioning whether hard work and talent still mattered in Cleveland, or if politics had taken over the depth chart. And then, longtime Browns insider Tony Gracie dropped the hammer. He revealed what many had suspected. Shedeur Sanders was never part of Stefanski's long-term plan. Gracie said the coaching staff questioned his reliability, not his skill, not his arm, not his accuracy, but his fit in the system. A word that feels more like coded language than real analysis. And that changed everything. Because in team facilities where dynamics are built on trust and fairness, that kind of statement rattles the building. Guys can handle competition, but deliberately denying someone a shot before they ever get on the field, that causes real problems. Suddenly, this wasn't just a quarterback decision, it was a statement from Stfansky. Shedeur's not our guy. And he's never going to be. The camp tension turned into frustration. Players started asking real questions. Analysts lit up sports radio. Social media exploded. And Shedeur? He stayed quiet. Showed up. Did the work. Spoke like a pro every time reporters asked. No complaints, no drama, just focus. But behind the scenes, it was clear something nasty was brewing. And the deeper this went, the more obvious it became. This wasn't about football anymore. Once the rumors became public, the silence didn't last long. Players weren't just murmuring behind closed doors anymore. They were watching, reacting, and questioning everything about the team's direction. And that's when Cleveland's quiet problem exploded into a full-blown national story. Everyone could see it. Dillon Gabriel was getting 100% of the first-team reps, and Shedeur Sanders wasn't even in the conversation. Not injured, not struggling off the field, just completely iced out. And it made even less sense when you looked at the depth chart. Stfansky had already let go of 2 reliable veteran backups. That left Dillon as the lone man standing, with a rookie behind him who wasn't even allowed to practice with the starters. All it would take was one awkward sack, and the whole season falls on the shoulders of a kid who hasn't even been allowed to prepare. That's not smart coaching, that's gambling with a blindfold on. And people noticed. The media flipped almost overnight. Sports talk shows lit up with outrage, and insiders started asking the questions Stfansky clearly didn't want to answer. What exactly is he afraid of? Because burying a top quarterback prospect and risking an entire season isn't strategy, it looks like insecurity. And right in the middle of that firestorm, someone dropped a match. Chad Ochocinco-Johnson, former NFL Pro Bowler and never one to hold his tongue, took to social media and unloaded. "This is nonsense," he said. "Total nonsense. If you're scared to give a dude reps, you're scared to compete." He wasn't vague, he wasn't polite. He called it out for what it looked like politics. Chad reminded fans that Dillon Gabriel did get meaningful reps when he backed up Joe Flacco. Why should it be different now? Just because it's Shedeur? Johnson wasn't alone either. More former players and analysts began chiming in, echoing the same frustration. Give the kid a shot. Let talent speak for itself. Why bury your most gifted quarterback over what seems like personal bias? But the real pressure wasn't just online. It was inside the building. Coaches were reportedly growing uncomfortable. Staff began distancing themselves from Stefansky's approach, trying to convince the media that nothing was wrong. But by then, the damage was already done. One insider called it a bizarre obsession. Another said it felt like Shedeur was being punished for something that hasn't even happened. The fans? Furious. Everywhere you looked. Twitter, fan forums, local radio Browns Nation was turning on its head coach. Meanwhile, Shedeur kept working in silence. Still no first-team reps, still showing elite accuracy in the limited snaps they let him have, usually against practice squad defenders. But even there, he kept getting noticed. They say pressure reveals character, and in Cleveland, that pressure was rising fast and it was starting to show in all the wrong places. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any messier, the team's quarterback coach made a statement that changed everything. With the media hammering Stfansky and fans demanding answers, the Browns tried to do damage control, but it was already too late. Inside the locker room, players were confused and some were growing quietly defiant. How could a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders, praised in college for his poise, intelligence, and elite accuracy, not even be given a fair shot? Especially when it was clear the team had no veteran safety net behind Gabriel, it started as frustration. But soon, it turned into division. And the turning point? It came from inside the coaching staff itself. Quarterbacks coach Bill Musgrave was dragged into the headlights, asked point-blank why Dillon Gabriel was taking every first-team snap while Shedeur was left working with backups and camp bodies. At first, Musgrave echoed the official team line. Dillon was the more game-ready QB at the moment. But then, he slipped. Pressed further by reporters, Musgrave pivoted. This time, he didn't downplay Shedeur, he praised him. He spoke about his growth, composure, competitive fire, and focus. Said Shedeur had been quietly dominating in camp sessions, that his preparedness was off the charts, and that he could handle any reps first team, second team, it didn't matter. Wait, what? The same coaching staff that had buried Shedeur for weeks was now admitting he was ready? That he was outperforming expectations? That one quote flipped everything, because it confirmed what many suspected. This was no longer about performance. Even the coaching staff knew it. Shedeur had the skill, the hunger, the discipline, but Stfansky still refused to budge. And players? They noticed. A few started staying after practice to get extra reps in with Shedeur completely on their own. Subtle but powerful. Some began reposting highlights and footage of him from college on Instagram and X. Others were seen liking social media posts criticizing the coaching strategy. It was quiet support, but it was support. The quarterback room was fracturing. And behind closed doors, the whispers turned into undeniable tension. Some players reportedly started questioning Stefansky's judgment, directly wondering why the team was walking a tightrope without even preparing its backup. Worst-case scenarios were on everyone's minds. What if Dillon goes down? What if he struggles mid-season? There's no plan B, just raw talent Stefansky refuses to trust. One insider said the team felt unprepared and divided. Another called it a silent mutiny. This wasn't just bad PR anymore, it was internal implosion. And all this time, Shedeur stayed the same, locked in, focused, saying all the right things, still showing up early, still delivering absolute lasers in warm-ups, still staying late. He didn't need to campaign for support, the locker room was doing that for him. But before anything could be done, someone stepped in from above and lit a fuse that would change everything. The owner had officially had enough. When owners step into football decisions, it's usually a bad sign. But in Cleveland, it might have been the best thing to happen all year. Because when the locker room started splitting, the media started attacking, and the fans began calling for blood, Jimmy Haslam picked up the phone, and everything changed. According to multiple insiders, Haslam didn't just express concern, he went straight to Kevin Stefanski's office for a closed door, one-on-one meeting that insiders described as tense and unmistakably direct. The message? Crystal clear. Shedeur Sanders is not being traded. He's not being buried. And he's not leaving Cleveland. Haslam reportedly told Stfansky, 3 games aren't enough to crown Dillon Gabriel the future. You have to keep this kid here and treat him like he matters. And just like that, the playing field shifted. This wasn't speculation anymore. The most powerful man in the building had broken his silence, and he wasn't buying the Dillon-only narrative his coach was selling. Sources close to the team said Haslam had been watching Shedeur quietly throughout camp, tracking his improvement, his accuracy, his confidence under pressure, and maybe more importantly, how he handled the constant disrespect with total maturity. To Haslam, this wasn't about picking sides, it was about protecting an asset, a rare one. He sees franchise potential, and he's not letting it slip through the cracks just because a coach has tunnel vision. The timing couldn't have been more crucial. Insiders say the relationship between Stfansky and the front office was already strained, but now it was on life support. This kind of move, an owner overruling the head coach, doesn't happen often. And when it does, it usually signals one thing: the coach is losing the building. Stfansky wasn't just being second-guessed, he was being directly challenged by his own boss. And that made waves everywhere inside the Browns facility. Players felt it. Media ran wild with it. Fan reactions exploded across social platforms, most overwhelmingly on Shedeur's side. Even former players started dropping messages of support online. In less than 24 hours, the entire power dynamic in Cleveland flipped. And there was no going back. In the days following Haslam's move, whispers revealed just how deep the divide had gone. Some sources claimed Haslam had been sitting in on team meetings, watching practice footage, listening in on strategy sessions. If true, that's not oversight. That's damage control from the top. And then came Mary Kay Cabot. A respected veteran insider, Cabot didn't sugarcoat her critique. She said the coaching excuses didn't hold water, not after what she'd seen in camp. She made it clear in multiple reports. Shedeur was the better quarterback. Period. And as her voice joined the growing swell, it hit Stfansky like a second wave of pressure. Because now it wasn't just players and fans and pundits. Now it was the boss, and the press, and the people with real access to the truth. Kevin Stefanski wasn't just facing a quarterback controversy anymore. He was running out of allies. Up until now, most of the drama surrounding Shedeur Sanders had come from speculation whispers in the locker room, mysterious depth chart decisions, cryptic sideline moments. But then, the people with actual access broke their silence. And that's when everything changed. The first big voice to step in? Mary Kay Cabot, one of the most respected insiders covering the Browns. She spent years on the front lines, attending practices, speaking to team personnel, and tracking every training camp rep with a journalist's eye. And in her words, the coaching staff was flat out wrong. Cabot didn't tiptoe around it. She said Shedeur Sanders wasn't just ready to play. He was clearly outperforming Dillon Gabriel in multiple areas. His pinpoint accuracy, his mechanics, his timing, his ability to throw on the move, hit tight windows, and run the offensive structure under pressure. These weren't just flashes. This was real quarterback play, consistent, sharp, and reliable. But somehow, still ignored. Mary Kay said what the rest of the football world was thinking but didn't have the access to prove. I've watched every throw, every drill, every decision in camp. Shedeur is clearly ahead. She described his arm talent as rare his touch as NFL ready, and his presence as mature way beyond his years. And she wasn't alone. Other local beat reporters, those on the ground every day, began echoing the same thing, quietly at first, then louder. They described a quarterback who showed up early, nailed every mental rep, and seemed to grow sharper as the camp wore on. But despite all of that, Stfansky kept him buried. And that's when the word started creeping into headlines: sabotage. Nobody wanted to believe it at first, but as the inconsistencies piled up, the lack of reps, the excuses, the way Shedeur was publicly dismissed without ever getting a real shot, fans and insiders started connecting the dots. Why hide a player who was clearly shining in practice? Why push all the pressure onto a first-year starter like Gabriel and hold back someone who might be even better? One league insider even commented off-record, "If this was happening with a first-round pick, it'd be a scandal." And that's the thing, people are starting to treat it like one. You've got former players siding with Shedeur, saying this wouldn't be tolerated on another team. Analysts comparing it to other QB rooms, where the best player is allowed to prove it in real time, not just buried by coaching politics. And at the center of it all, Shedeur himself, still quiet, still locked in, still doing the work. The louder the chaos around him gets, the more composed he appears. And maybe that's what has everyone talking. Because in a media storm this loud, a rookie quarterback staying calm says one very powerful thing. He knows. His time is coming. And the people inside the building? They know it too, whether they admit it or not. By the time the owner's ultimatum hit the news cycle, you could almost hear the air hiss out of the Browns' practice facility. Everyone knew the storm was coming next. Nobody knew who would survive it. Kevin Stefanski tried to pretend nothing had changed. Same tone in press conferences, same polished coach speak about trusting the process. But you could see it in his eyes, that tight, tired look of a man backed into a corner. He wasn't controlling the story anymore. The story was controlling him. Every question from reporters circled the same subject: Shedeur Sanders. Where is he in the rotation? Why hasn't he had a single first-team rep? What exactly is holding this kid back? Stfansky dodged, deflected, and doubled down. Each answer sounded more defensive than the last, and each one set off fresh waves of headlines. Meanwhile, Dillon Gabriel was hanging on by a thread. One shaky practice, a couple of under-thrown passes in a preseason scrimmage, and the booing started. Not because fans hated Dillon, they just couldn't understand why the better arm was still standing on the sideline holding a clipboard. Local sports talk shows turned ruthless. National analysts jumped in. The storyline had left Cleveland and gone league-wide. Is Kevin Stefanski sabotaging his own team? Inside the locker room, you could feel the shift. Players who had been politely silent were whispering again, only this time there was visible frustration during drills. Receivers nudging reporters, muttering things like, "You should see Shedeur throw." The trust between coach and roster was fracturing one quiet conversation at a time. And through it all, Shedeur just kept working. He arrived before the cameras, left after the lights dimmed, said nothing controversial. That composure only fed the public perception that he was the adult in the room while his coach was spiraling. By midweek, the backlash reached critical mass. An investigative piece accused Stfansky of willful mismanagement. A panel on primetime television counted down the weeks until ownership might make a change. The Browns' press briefing started ending early because the questions had turned brutal. One insider described the mood as apocalyptic football energy staff walking on eggshells, executives suddenly appearing on the practice field, assistants whispering in hallways as if the walls could record them. And for the first time, people close to Stfansky admitted what everyone suspected. This wasn't about competition or scheme, it was about control. Losing it, grasping at it, watching it slip away. Each day that Shedeur stayed sidelined, the perception hardened that the coach's pride mattered more than progress. And that perception spread faster than any official statement could stop it. When fans started chanting Shedeur's name during open practice, it sealed the moment. This wasn't just another QB controversy anymore, it had become a referendum on leadership. The Browns weren't fighting for a starter, they were fighting for their identity. And somewhere deep down, everyone in that building knew what had to happen next. Because there's a limit to how long an organization can balance on drama's edge before gravity takes over. Every organization hits that invisible line where private tension becomes public crisis, and by late August, the Browns had crossed it. The signs were everywhere, players speaking in half sentences, press conferences suddenly rescheduled, and reporters describing the facility's air as thick enough to cut. Kevin Stefanski still tried to keep control, but the narrative had grown a body of its own. Once the owner weighs in against you, the countdown begins. The first crack arrived on a Tuesday morning, a harmlessly-sounding tweet from a veteran wide receiver. 3 words, no names, play the truth. It blew up within minutes. Teammates liked it, fans screenshot it, and by noon, the post led every sports radio segment in Ohio. You could practically hear the walls closing in. That afternoon's practice sealed it. Reporters on the sidelines noticed Jimmy Haslam and the general manager standing together, clipboards, no smiles, eyes fixed on the quarterbacks. Dillon Gabriel took the usual first-team reps and missed several throws in a row. Shedeur stepped in for a handful of scout team snaps and lasered 2 perfect deep balls that froze the entire defense. The sideline went quiet, that kind of quiet, the sound of realization. Within hours, league insiders started whispering about an emergency meeting. Evaluation of team direction, one source called it. Everyone else translated that the same way. The coach was in trouble. For the players, the tension flipped to open sympathy. A few veterans hung around after practice to toss with Shedeur, a silent yet unmistakable gesture. Some posted cryptic emojis on Instagram, hourglasses, eyes, lightning bolts. The message was obvious. They were waiting for something to happen, and the fans were ahead of them. Social media surveys showed more than 70% of supporters now wanted Shedeur under center immediately. Season nut ticket holders were flooding comment sections with messages like, "Let him play or let the coach go." The city had picked a side. Inside Berea, personnel staff began preparing 2 contingency plans. Plan A: give Stfansky 1 more preseason game to prove that sticking with Dillon could work. Plan B: hit the reset button and make Shedeur the future face of the franchise, whether the head coach liked it or not. What happened next felt almost inevitable. Midway through that next exhibition, Dillon threw a pair of interceptions that sucked the life out of the stadium. Cameras cut to Haslam in the box. He didn't flinch, he just turned away and spoke to someone off-screen. Viewers could guess the conversation. By the final whistle, insiders were already reporting that a significant evaluation meeting would take place the next morning. Translation: decisions were coming. No official statement yet, but everyone from players to reporters to concession workers could feel it. The script was preparing for its twist. When ownership publicly backs one quarterback, the locker room rallies behind him, and the coach still refuses to change course. There's only one ending left on the page. The Browns weren't just debating who should start anymore. They were gearing up for a reckoning that could rewrite the entire organization's leadership chart. The next chapter wouldn't be about rumors or reps. It would be about survival. By the time the meeting wrapped and the doors reopened, Cleveland had changed. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone understood. The franchise had hit the reset button. The decision itself didn't even need to be announced. It was written in every face that walked down the hallway, assistants whispering into phones, players exchanging careful nods, reporters jogging toward the lobby with that something would just happen urgency. Whether Kevin Stefanski resigned, was reassigned, or simply overruled hardly mattered anymore. The story had outgrown titles. This was about power, who has it, who loses it, and what happens when ego collides with raw potential. And at the heart of it all stood one young quarterback who refused to fold. Shedeur Sanders had absorbed every slight, every question, every locked door, and met it with the one thing no coach can scheme against: consistency. He showed up early, threw until the lights dimmed, and let his performance make the argument words never could. When the new depth chart appeared on the whiteboard days later, the silence from the locker room was deafening. Then came a ripple of applause. Not loud, just genuine. It sounded like relief. Outside the facility, the city erupted. Fans poured their months of frustration into chants of hope, shirts, memes, highlight reels. Cleveland had finally found something to believe in again, a symbol of resilience in a sport that so often chews its players up before they ever get a chance. And yet, victory never feels clean. Because behind the joy, there's a harsh reality. The Browns are still a team divided, trying to rebuild trust on the ashes of politics. One decision doesn't erase months of doubt. The question everyone's asking is simple but heavy. Can they pull together now that the truth is out? Observers around the league are watching closely. Some call Haslam reckless for stepping in. Others call him brave. To the neutral eye, it looks like a case study in modern sports leadership, when the people at the top finally act on what the numbers and eyes have been screaming all along. In the end, this saga isn't just about quarterback depth charts or play-eye calling tendencies. It's about belief who deserves it, who earns it, and what happens when that belief threatens authority. Shedeur Sanders didn't overthrow a coach with words. He did it with patience, precision, and proof. And that might be the most dangerous weapon in the NFL, undeniable talent backed by quiet determination. So, as the Browns prepare for a season that already feels like a movie script, one truth hovers over everything. This saga was never really about football. It's about how power responds when it meets potential. Maybe Cleveland finally learned that lesson the hard way. Maybe this is just the first act of something bigger. Either way, the rest of the league is watching. And after what just went down in that locker room, one thing's certain: Shedeur Sanders' story is only getting started.